time who wasn't here earlier on? No. Great. I won't recap. There are some people just not... Oh! Brilliant. Well, just to say, what you missed was I was trying to get us thinking about this question. In fact, the first question that if I had the courage, I'd have really gone for was, what are you doing with your life? You've got this one life. Are you hanging on until it ends and then we know everything's going to be good? And it is, by the way. I'm not knocking that. Really looking forward to that. But what about the life now? What about your life now? How do you live the life that is truly life? The Bible distinguishes between life and true life. Life and life in all its fullness. So how do you get that? And I want to, basically the next two sessions, I think there are two ways that you understand what your life is really for, and two ways that you can begin to understand how you have life in all its fullness. How you begin to have this kind of life that's a flame. Life that it's worthwhile coming to have a look at. And that's what we're going to think about in this session. There's a story told about Albert Einstein. I don't know whether you know this, but I'm told that Einstein, in his time, was a kind of rock star of his time. He was a sort of David Beckham-esque, one of the first proper celebrities. Lots of famous people who came up with theories, and artists, and even some musicians, their fame came after they died. For Einstein, he was this kind of poster boy, as crazy as it seems, within his own lifetime. He would go on speaking tours and thousands of people would come and listen to him. He was iconic even whilst he was still alive. And he would go from wherever he lived, and he was lecturing at Princeton University, and he would go all over the States doing different things. And his preferred method of getting there was on the train, and so he travelled thousands of miles on the train. And one day he got on the train and he sits down and he begins to work, and then he hears this guy coming along the corridors. Tickets please, tickets please. And the guy opens the door. Oh, Albert Einstein's in the carriage. And he says, hello, can I have your ticket please? And Einstein goes, here's somewhere, and he starts looking for it. And the guy says, don't worry, I'll come back in a bit. So he goes and does some other carriages. He comes back and he finds Mr. Einstein again and says, have you managed to find your ticket? There's Einstein with his coat off, his bags are open, stuff's all over the place. And he says, I've got to find it. And he says, well, I'll come back in 10 minutes. Goes away, comes back in 10 minutes. The whole compartment has been turned upside down. He's on his hands and knees. He's searching around for where it is. And he says, tickets please. And Albert Einstein says, I can't find it, I can't find it. To which the young man says, actually, it's okay. I know who you are. Albert Einstein says, young man, I know who I am, I just don't know where I'm going. And in this little session that we've got before another break, I wonder what you think's most important in life. Is it more important that you know where you're going, or is it more important that you know who you are? Because I think that the world, and it's definitely crept into our sort of church life, is it's most important to know where you're going. Not just after you die, we're talking about now. I think that the kind of drive to have a successful life is you need to say where you're going. I see it in local churches, that even in Brighton, who I visit, and they tell me their 5-year plans or their 10-year plans. And I look at our church and I think, I'm not sure what we're doing next week. And yet they've written down the 10-year plan because it's important to know where you're going. And people come to our church and we have been blessed to see growth, and we've been blessed to see new stuff happening, and the place is buzzing and alive, and it's a privilege to be part of it. And people come to me sometimes and they say, show us how you're doing it. And they're waiting for me to get out some document or whatever on the 10-year plan. And the reality is, I don't really know, is the honest answer. We have new people pretty much every week when we gather on a Sunday. Well, no, not pretty much. Every Sunday there's somebody new. There's always a new story. We're just in that season of life at the moment. Somebody's bought somebody. Someone's wandered over the road and decided to come into church that we're told never happens. And we're seeing it happen. It's an exciting thing. People go, oh, what's your strategy? And I say, oh, we don't have one. We've got no evangelism strategy. When we restarted the church, because we closed them both down 2 years ago on Easter Friday, we had a service to say thank you, God, for the incredible heritage and faithfulness of people of Gloucester Place Baptist Church and Florence Road Baptist Church. 2 great churches that were now in a very different season of their life. And we said thank you for them on Good Friday. On Sunday morning, we met on the beach and we thanked God for the birth of a new church out of the death of these 2 old churches called One Church. What that meant when we became new was that we got to talk about, well, what kind of leadership should we have? Should we do membership? What kind of church should we be, and how do we do it for this time, this place here in Brighton? That exciting ability to sort of start again. And the thing that we felt was that it's more important that we know who we are than we know where we're going. So what we did was we did a lot of work to say, God, what are the values that you want us to live out? Specifically to our church and our time and our point in history, what are the values? And we found these out of lots of prayer and lots of discussion, and it took a long time. And then one day that the leadership went away, it felt like it just sort of fell into place. And we had these 5 values that we felt God had really put on our hearts. And then we went to the church and we said, these are the values we're going to live out. And they said, great, but what's the goals? And we said, the goals are to live out these values. All right, great. What's the 10-year strategy? The 10-year strategy is to live out these values. And what we look like and the structures we have will happen themselves. I actually found that massively challenging for me. Because I had all kinds of things I want to achieve in my life, when actually I felt the quiet voice of the Holy Spirit say, it's more important that you know who you are, and I'll worry about what your life ends up achieving. Mother Teresa, didn't she, famously said that famously says, and then I can't remember the quote, it's a great, I told you this stuff happens to me all the time, but she said, we're not called to be successful, we're called to be obedient. And that's incredibly profound, because we think that we're all supposed to be successful. And there's lots of preaching, there's lots of TV channels out there that would tell you that God has marked you out for success, for wealth, for health, to rise up in any industry that you're in, to rise up in any job that you're in, to be the best dad you can be, the best husband you can be, the best wife, the best parent, all of those things, all of that stuff, the pressure to be the best successful thing. But I think Mother Teresa's right. We're just called to be obedient. So if you know who you are, and you commit yourself to being the who that you're supposed to be, then that's an act of faith that says, actually, I will end up being in the right place if I end up being the right person. And so what we're going to do in this little session is we're going to use a psalm to reflect on where you're at and who you are. Because if you're going to find out life in all its fullness, and this life that is truly life, I think the first question you have to ask yourself is, well, where am I today? Who am I? How am I doing? It's all very well thinking about moving on from here, but where are you right now? And the most self-aware character, I think, in the whole of Scripture, the most vulnerable and honest and consistently vulnerable, honest and self-aware person in the whole of Scripture, other than Christ, is David, the psalmist. Because psalm after psalm of writing down where he is. This is how I am with you today, God. It always fascinates me that, the most famous psalm, Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want, is prefaced by Psalm 22, which is, my God, why have you forsaken me? Isn't it incredible to have 2 psalms next to each other? One that Christ cries out, why have you forsaken me? Christ didn't go to the garden and say, oh Lord, you're my shepherd, I'll never be in want. David had this incredible ability to be honest about who he was and where he was. So what we're going to do, and we do this all the time in our church, so it's sort of become normal, but I realised that it might be abnormal, is you're going to do a bit of work. Is that all right? I'll split my fee with you if you work hard at it. But you're going to do a bit of work, because we're going to look at this psalm, and all I want you to do, and this isn't a test, this isn't to try and show anybody up, is I just want you to talk to some people around you about what strikes you about the psalm. Okay? So that you engage with it a bit more, and so you're not just sitting listening to me. We'll read it through, and then all I want you to do is I want you to just chat to some people around you, 2s, 3s, 4s, and just say, oh, I thought that was interesting. I've never noticed that when I've said this psalm before. That bit doesn't make sense to me. That bit I really like. Does that make sense? And the psalm is Psalm 121. So if you've got a Bible near you, you might want to turn to it. Sort of a well-known psalm. In fact, I think it's well-known because the opening line is very well-known, and we've sung worship songs about it. But I want us to think honestly, okay? Emphasis on honesty and vulnerability. And if you're an extrovert here, you might want to move from your chair in a minute and go and say hello to somebody and make sure that they're included. Please don't let anybody be sitting there on their own. Let's do that together. So I'm going to read it through, and then I'm going to read it through again. And then we're going to have a few minutes for you to just chat with people around you. What strikes you? Does that make sense? Are you with me? Say yes, Dave? Yes. Brilliant. So this is what the psalmist says. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and going, both now and forevermore. You familiarised yourself with it. You're probably thinking, oh yeah, I've read this before. So what strikes you? Let's read it once more. And be honest, what does it make you think as you see this psalm? Either it might be a word, it might be a sentence, it might be the whole thing. What is it provoking you? What do you think about? I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and going, both now and forevermore. You've got about 3 minutes and 48 seconds to have a quick chat. And if you're sitting there thinking, I don't know what to say, nothing strikes me, don't worry about that. Say that. That's absolutely fine. Go for it. 30 seconds more if you want to finish that point you're making. Realised we were a bit pushed for time, so that was probably 12 seconds earlier than I promised you. Sorry to disappoint you. But I want to ask you another specific question that you're going to, again, just... Well, in fact, we'll do it as a sort of wider room. But is anybody brave enough to just share something that you... Either somebody shared with you and you thought, oh, that's really interesting, or something that you thought yourself? Yeah, at the back.
Mark.
Mark, go ahead.
I've always thought of the mountains as being inspirational. I love hills, I love mountains, but I know my help comes from the Lord. But talking, the mountains were seen in a slightly different light. There's huge problems. Mountains are problems. So I lift up my eyes to all my problems. Where does my help come from?
Brilliant.
It's a new thought to me.
Yeah. Isn't it fascinating that we've known these, we sung these worship words, I lift my eyes up, and then you stop and think, hold on a minute, are the mountains a good thing or a bad thing? Is he comparing it, or is he lifting them up as a good thing? So a really good point, thank you. What else?
I liked verse 2 where it says, my help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. So even though they may not be in the right place, they're affirming what they know about God, and standing on what they've already experienced and know.
Yeah, so do people hear that? That the experience that they know, that even going back to the mountains thing, the maker of heaven and earth, the maker of all this stuff, about affirming who he's put his hope in. Any other thoughts? Yes?
Yes, I was thinking, he will not let your foot slip. Years ago I was sent flowers from the church. I had a 4-length plaster.
Right.
And they sent me that text, "Suffer not your foot to be moved." And I was so down, and it really lifted me.
Right.
And it made me realise that things, God knows, and he sends things sometimes, that they wouldn't if they'd have thought about what I'd got sent me. But God knows that that's what I needed.
Yeah.
And it made me laugh, so every time I see that...
I'm going to lodge that as a pastoral thing. Next time somebody breaks their leg. Oh, by the way, he will not let your foot slip. Unconfessed sin in your life is... that's funny. Brilliant. Thank you. Yes, sorry. Brilliant. Thank you.
What kind of help was he looking for, I wondered? If you look at the previous psalm, he was surrounded by people that didn't like him.
Yeah. Yeah, Psalm 120. Psalm 121 is part of the Psalm of Ascents. There are 15 of them, and the idea behind the Psalms were David wrote them with the intention of other people singing them, with other people speaking them out. And we think that he wrote them specifically for people who were coming up to Jerusalem. So they were on the road together, and they were singing these truths to one another. Psalm 121 works quite nicely with that thought, as we're going to see, but Psalm 120 is much different tone altogether. But these different psalms where you come up to, you're approaching Jerusalem, you're approaching the temple, you're approaching the Holy of Holies, you're approaching this time where you're bringing yourself and you're singing together truths about your situation. Maybe nobody wants to say it, but I can't believe we've just read what we've read and nobody's thinking, it's a nice psalm, but it's not true. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. Is it true? Is it aspirational? Some people are going yes because we're in church and you feel you've got to say yes. That's patronising you. Because I think it is true. But I think that if we were to show this to people outside of these four walls, they would say, I know Christians. They're not people without problems. They're not people who have never been harmed. You can't read this without asking yourself that question. Is this actually true? And the bit that I want you to think about, and the bit that I gave a lot of thought to recently, was that opening line. The bit that was raised right at the beginning. So helpfully, I lift my eyes up to the mountains. Where does my help come from? The context of that, I think it's really important you understand it. And the bit I really love about David's Psalms is that they are written specifically about a time and a place. And we've turned them and we can look at all kinds of meanings. The reality is we don't know for certain. So here's kind of three options, if you like, of what was actually going on in and around them that made David write this psalm. I think that he's literally looking at mountains. He's not in his study somewhere thinking about what would be a great opening line for a worship chorus in 2,000 years' time or thousands of years' time. He's looking at mountains. So, here's 3 options for you, and all of them, I think, challenge us as to about where we're at, who we are, and where we're at. The first is that we often forget that David was a military leader. He's a military guy who's coming, and even the implication that I look up to the mountains, where does it mean he is? He's in a valley. He's not on a mountain top. You don't look up to mountains when you're on the mountain top. The implication as we begin Psalm 121 is wherever David is, he's in a low place. And that could signify all kinds of things. It could signify that he felt he's in danger. But I think as a military leader, he knows the one place he doesn't want to be is in the valley. Why? Because you're open to all kinds of attack. None of us in this room have ever done any history or geography and haven't got taken on some field trip as children to some old ruin of a castle and found it in a valley. Why? They're always on top of the mountain, because that's the safe place to be. It's the easiest way to defend. You don't want to have anybody higher than you, otherwise you are vulnerable. And I think that one of the ways we understand this psalm is imagining that David's saying, basically, I wish I was somewhere else. I wish I was up there. I don't want to be in a valley. I don't want to be down here. I want to be on the mountaintop. I mean, Christian after Christian who wants to be on the mountaintop, who doesn't want to be in their current position. I'm fed up with this struggle. I'm fed up with who I am. I'm fed up with my doubts and worries and concerns. If only I could be up there. I think that's what this psalm could be about. The second thing I think was alluded to as well, is that it could be that this is David looking at creation and being inspired, and he is in awe and wonder. He's not saying, I wish I was there so that it was better. He's saying, I want the certainty of that security that was mentioned by, I thought I could read the lady's badge, Lucy? Lizzie, by Lizzie down here. I can look up to these mountains, these old symbols of God's power and creativity and authority, and perhaps what he's thinking is, that's all very well, I can look at these majestic mountains, but where's God with me? Where's my hope? I can see my hope in what he's achieved, but I'm in the valley and he's not with me. So is he thinking, I want to be somewhere else because I don't want to be here where I am? Or is he thinking, I want God to be here with me and not there? Or is a third way, which I think is perhaps a better explanation, the time that David's writing and this journey up to Jerusalem is a time when people of other faiths, other beliefs are surrounding the area. David is constantly in battles to try and keep this nation that he's king of on the right track, following the one true God. But around him are other empires, other cultures that are invading not just their space, but also their culture and their religious practices. All around them are people who are beginning to show how other idols, other people who are being, other prophets, other things that are worshipping are other possibilities. That there's no longer just one choice, but there's lots of choices. And the place where you worshipped your idols was on the mountaintop. So as David walks towards Jerusalem, this place where God is dwelling, this place where he's taking his sacrifice, he looks up to the mountains, and what he sees is all of the other things that the people are putting their hopes in. Not just people outside of the nation of Israel, but is beginning to pervade his people. The two, and again this is speculation, but certainly the two most known about, that we know about, other gods, other deities that were being worshipped were Baal, we've heard about Baal, and Asherah. And these two characters were worshipped by different people in different ways. Baal was known as the sun god. He was worshipped by the prophets of Baal, the followers of Baal, and we know a little bit about him because you'll know all about Elijah's battle with the prophets of Baal. You remember that story where Elijah says, let's put on a barbecue, but let's not use matches, and see who wins, and God wins. It's a great story. But it's the prophets of Baal who are on the other side who can't get their barbecue lit for all they're doing, And why can't they get their barbecue lit? Why can't they get their God to listen to them? Do people know the story? What does Elijah taunt them with? He's asleep. He's on holiday. He's gone on holiday. Even some translations say perhaps he's on the toilet. It's true. Perhaps he's on the toilet, perhaps he's on holiday, perhaps he's fast asleep. He's taunting them, and for years I just thought that was sort of street, that's the way you cuss somebody else's God. But Baal specifically did sleep. The people who followed Baal believed that he slept. So the reason that the priests, part of their ritual was every morning, if you were a priest, a prophet of Baal, your job was to wake up the god every morning. So we're laughing about it, aren't we? But that was what they believed. So the priest's job was to rouse Baal, because he was known to be a god who liked to sleep around, literally, a god of orgies, a god of drunkenness, and a god who slept. Funny sort of god to worship, really, but they worshipped him and they had to wake him up. So Elijah wasn't just taunting him in a general way. He was saying, this God that you've got, what sort of a God do you worship? You've got to wake him up. The other god that we know about in this time was Asherah, who was a kind of the female equivalent of Baal. One of the names of Baal was the sun god, but also the king of heaven. And Asherah's title was the queen of heaven. And if Baal represented the sun, Asherah represented the moon. And people worshipped Asherah with these Asherah poles. And we're not entirely sure what they look like, but there are some evidence that actually the way that you made an idol, a post to Asherah, was you got trees and you took the branches off them. So these very straight, high poles to Asherah that had no branches on them. And I want you to imagine that David is there and he's walking through this valley and he's looking up and he's seeing these altars to the prophet Baal over here. And up on this mountain he's seeing all of these trees where the limbs have been cut off them because they are there to worship Asherah, the goddess of the moon and the god of the sun, the king of heaven and the queen of heaven. Let's just read it one more time, and I want you to imagine that perhaps is what's going through David's mind. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and going, both now and evermore. Does that make sense to you, that that's perhaps what David's writing about? That he's saying this, that if you want to live your life, a life that's truly life, and life in all its fullness, then your hope has to be in the right thing. Because if you put your hope in anything other than the maker of heaven and earth, then those idols are life-taking. The reason that they stripped the trees so that they worshipped Asherah, the reason that they took these sacrifices to Baal was because they were frightened that if they didn't, they would be harmed by the gods. Harmed by the sun, harmed by the moon. Obviously harmed by the sun, because you get sunstroke in a very hot country like that, and they were frightened of it. It would burn them. It would make them ill. And you might think, what is there to be frightened of the sun? In the original Hebrew language here, it's sunstroke. It's sunstroke, and it says moonstroke. So I think, that's a weird thing, isn't it? Do you know what moonstroke is? Do you know where we get the word lunacy from? From people believe that it was connected with the moon. That the sun harms you physically, and the moon harms you mentally. That people given to lunacy is because of the moon. Because of Asherah, you haven't pleased her, and she sends madness upon you. If you don't please Baal, he sends sunstroke upon you. He dries out the land. He takes away your crops. And the idols around them, if they were placated, could give you life. But you lived in fear all the time that they were actually going to destroy you. So you were placating them. David's message is completely different. He says our God isn't like that. Our God is the maker of these mountains. Our God is the maker of heaven and earth. He's not the king of heaven or the queen of heaven. He's the maker of heaven. You don't need shade from him because he's the one who provides the shade for you. It's a beautiful picture of this God who says, I want nothing from you, I love you and I will protect you. I love that closing line. And again, what does it mean? The Lord will watch over you coming and going. You ever thought about that? I think what it means is he will look after you and love you when you come towards him, and he will look after you and love you when you walk away from him. Both coming and going. That's not the deal with Baal and Asherah. They're only going to bless you when you come towards them and you give. This is the message that David's learned, is that God, in his mercy and in his love for his people, will protect you. And if you want to know how you'd have life in all its fullness, you begin by knowing that you live in the shade of a God who desires the best for you. That no harm comes to you from God. It doesn't mean that harm won't still come. The moon is still there and the sun is still there. But no harm will come to you from God. And David's pointing out that the other idols that they give their lives to will bring them harm. I've really run out of time, but I want us to finish with a little piece of video. Is that all right? We're going to run over just by a few minutes, but I'll make the next session shorter. If you believe that, you believe anything. Because I just think it's a nice way to finish. Because I think that when you pause and ask yourself, how am I doing, Lord? Am I knowing life in all its fullness? How am I doing with my life? You could go to a very dark place. You can begin to beat yourself up and say, I'm letting him down. I hate it whenever a preacher asks me to pause and think about how I'm doing, because I begin to think about the habits that I have that are bad. I begin to think about the ways that I fall short. I begin to think about those decisions that I should have made when I was younger and I should have done and I didn't do. None of that comes from God. All he is interested in is this moment and the next moment, and wants you to be fully alive and fully you. I spoke in the last session about one of my spiritual heroes dying, called Dallas Willard. Well, another one of my spiritual heroes died recently. You don't want to be a spiritual hero of mine because it's a bad season. But this guy is called Brennan Manning. Not Bernard Manning, Brennan Manning. And I really, really love Brennan Manning. He just lived his whole life with one message. And he kept saying it over and over again. And all he was interested in, he was a one-trick pony, and his trick was this. That he wanted people to know that God loved them. He wanted them to know that they were under his grace. And there was a video of him right at the end of his life again. And he's riddled with Parkinson's. And he can't hold a microphone or anything, and his hands are curling up. And somebody manages to get a microphone near him. And he starts to say the words that he has said all his life. And this is him years earlier. And this is basically his simple message, and I want to try and play it to you. I don't know whether this is going to work. Ignore that. Let's see. It's not going to work, is it? Have you got any sound? No. Twice I'm going to have to explain via the gift of... No? Okay, maybe we'll start with it. But let me just tell you what he says in 10 seconds. He finishes by saying this, is that God loves you just as you are, not as you should be, because you're never going to be as you should be. And as you begin to ask yourself, who am I? What am I here for? How do I go to the next level of depth in serving God and loving him? If you hear any other words other than those, then it's a counterfeit God and an idol that you are putting your trust in, who demands something from you, otherwise you'll be punished. No guilt, no punishment, I believe, comes from him. He's come to give you life, and life in its absolute fullness. And he loves you right now, just as you are, not as you should be, because you will never be as you should be. That's the grace of God that frees us to live life in all its fullness. We're going to have another break. I think you're going to go and drink more tea and coffee, and we're going to come back. And if we can get it to work, we will pick up from there, if that's okay. Thank you for listening.